He has stopped cold the American drive to an insane war in Syria, which Putin is right, would rapidly expand. The Iranians and the Russians would provide weapons to make up for what the Syrians lost. I think this would spill over. The number of casualties, dead and wounded, and refugees would increase. The war would go on longer and longer. And he is right about the character and composition of part of the rebel force. They are terrorists. They're the ones doing what they're doing in Malula. And the United States, why are we providing weapons to rebels who want to overthrow the government and destroy the army that is trying to protect Malula?
And the CIA has already made these weapon drops. We have reports that that's already underway.
This is what the President Obama and Kerry's policy is incoherent. They say we want this strike, military strike, to be so unbelievably small, this is Kerry, that it cannot overturn the regime in Damascus. We don't want to overturn it. Why? Because we're afraid of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Why then are we giving weapons to the rebels who want to overturn the regime?
No, we're on all sides of this thing, and we're offending all parties, which is a real problem.
Well, look, the American people don't want the war. The U.S. military, they take polls of them, 80% don't want the war. Congress right there does not want the war. In his heart, Barack Obama doesn't want this war. He got himself out on a limb with his silly, ultimatum, Assad must go, you better not cross my red lines. But he had no authority and no power to enforce it.
I want to read you one more excerpt from this Putin op-ed and get the reaction of the venerable columnist. I would rather disagree, Putin wrote, with a case he, Obama, made on American exceptionalism, stating that the United States policy is what makes America different. It's what makes us exceptional. It is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation, Putin writes. There are big countries and small countries, rich and poor, those with long democratic traditions and those still finding their way to democracy. Their policies differ too. We are all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. Your thoughts?
This is very moving.
It's like a sermon.
It's like a sermon, but I will say this. I mean, the United States we do claim we're an exceptional nation. He says we do it because of our policy. Those of us who believe and love this country and believe it's, frankly, divinely inspired and the greatest and best country on earth, despite its failings and sins, I don't think we do so because we think the quality of our present leadership to me, it's pretty pedestrian in terms of its quality. But, I do agree with his fundamental point that, look, Madeleine Albright said in the 1990s, we are the indispensable nation. We see further than others. I mean, you hear that in Great Britain and France and all over the world and China all over the world. There's a real recoil and reaction to it. And I do think there is a braggadocio and an arrogance to American foreign policy. And I will say Mr. Bush, when he got up there and said, those who are not with us are against us in going to war. What does that say about John Paul II,
Yeah.
You say,
and it should be said,
right?
Pat Buchanan and Bob Novak of happy memory were opposed to Prince of Darkness, who was really ended up being a Duke of Light.
A human being.
He and you opposed that insurrection into Iraq when it was going on, and you were ridiculed and scorned all over this town. You have the same position on this incursion into Syria. Is it for the same reason?
Similar reason. Let me say this. The difference is, Novak and I, when we were out there opposing the war in Iraq, we said, we're going to crush the Iraqis. But down the road, this is going to turn into a disaster when we occupy them, given their different religion, culture, and all the rest of it. Don't do this. And we wound up with, 4,500 dead, 35,000 wounded warriors, and $1 trillion gone, and the place is falling apart. This time, though, I will say, Raymond, what they call me an isolationist, is not true, but the anti-interventionist, the anti-war movement in the Republican Party and in this nation is now dominant. It is now the neocons and their crowd who desperately want war, the McCainiacs and all the rest. They are the ones in the minority now pushing for this war. But let me tell the folks out there, we've stopped, I think, this war temporarily on Syria. But what is coming is a drive for war with Iran.
You think that's the backdrop? This is the predicate to that.
Syria is the backdoor to war on Iran. Dress rehearsal.
Before we get to the president's speech, I want to touch on this. We covered this 5-hour-long prayer vigil, a day of prayer and fasting that the Pope called for. The chief rabbi of Rome joined him. The Grand Mufti in Syria joined him. Rick Warren joined him. People of all faiths to this day. How much do you credit that day of prayer and fasting for the odd turn of events we've seen just this week?
Well, I think, I'm certain that had an effect on Barack Obama because it reaches, I think his inner core is, he's not a war president. I mean, as I've written, his diffidence, his indecisiveness, he makes Adlai Stevenson look like Stonewall Jackson. And I don't think he wants this war in his heart, and he realizes he crawled out on a limb with these foolish statements, and frankly, he rescued himself first by saying, I have to go to the Congress and get approval.
Right.
The second thing that rescued him was Vladimir Putin, who came forward after Kerry made yet another gaffe, and he says, that's an outstanding offer you've got there, Secretary Kerry. We'll follow up on it. So to me, I'm elated with it. Look, are the Russians playing us? Are the Russians going to milk this thing?
Can they be trusted to secure these weapons?
They can be trusted in this sense. If it's in the Russians' interest, they will do what is there. And it is in their interest to get these poison gas weapons out of Syria and not let them fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda and these other terrorists, because otherwise those weapons will wind up in Dagestan and Ingushetia and Chechnya and the North Caucasus. Putin knows that. Putin detests these people. They've bombed Moscow repeatedly. He's the one who called up and said, look, the Sarnoff brothers, they're bad actors, fellas. You better keep an eye on them.
I want to share a bite with you from the president. This is from the speech this week about the evidence and the justification for a military strike in Syria. Listen to this. You as well.
On August 21st, when Assad's government gassed to death over 1,000 people, including hundreds of children. The images from this massacre are sickening. Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas. Others foaming at the mouth, gasping for breath. A father clutching his dead children, imploring them to get up and walk.
It is horrible.
On that terrible night, the world saw in gruesome detail the terrible nature of chemical weapons and why the overwhelming majority of humanity has declared them off limits.
Well, there he is, making this emotional argument for this military intervention. Did that wash? Does it wash?
Well, his description is exact. They're horrible. They've been outlawed for a good reason. But therefore, because the Syrian army did this, he has not produced evidence that Assad ordered it. In this country, you hang a man, put him to death for murder, unless you prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. If Assad ordered this, then let's see the evidence.
Burn him.
Secondly, Raymond, how do we invalidate or turn around what happened to those children?
All he needs is the proof. Give us the proof, President.
And killing 1,000 Syrians.
That's all we need.
How many Syrians must we kill in order to make us feel good about ourselves that we stood up and really blasted Assad? We're not going after him again. Yeah. Obama says, we don't want to take that regime
change,
but we're going to have to kill a lot of Syrians and destroy their weaponry, which enables the rebels, strengthens them, and as John McCain says, changes the battlefield so it moves toward a victory for the people who are doing what they're doing to Malula. It does not make sense.
This will
what makes sense?
This is going to do to Syria what we've seen the Christian community subject to in Iraq, which is obliteration.
What it's going to be is massive martyrdoms of Christians in Syria.
They're all martyrs.
These are devils. These people over there, they're doing what they're doing to Malula, going in there, telling people to convert, cutting their throats and things. These are people who are embedded with and around the new Syrian army, and we are equipping the new Syrian army to kill the army that is defending Malula.
It's unbelievable. The justification the president also invoked was, we are defending human dignity, human worth here. Right. I mean, there are occasions of human worth and dignity being offended all over the world. Sudan, China, North Korea. We could go down. Are we going to send Scud missiles into all of these countries?
Send them into Zimbabwe.
Yeah, exactly. Or Nigeria. We report every week. We report
Boko Haram, that crowd up there. But you know, and this is another point Putin made in his wonderful op-ed.
I think you're going to start syndicating, Pat.
No, but he made a good point. He said, you all went into Libya, and you you killed Gaddafi as a result, and you got rid of his regime. And what happened? His weapons and the terrorists moved into Mali immediately. And they're moving into Nigeria. They're spreading, Al-Qaeda is spreading out all over the region. I don't like these dictators. They're deplorable, detestable people. But you go down and you blow up their regime and destroy it, and all the creatures, it's not simply the good people that rise up there, right. All the noxious elements they were holding down come to the surface.
Yeah. And we've seen this as this Arab Spring has played out. You wrote not long ago that there are three elements to the Arab Spring that have been sort of unleashed: tribalism, nationalism, and Islamism. Tell us about that and the ultimate effect. What do you see looking at